When it comes to Lost Planet, I'm not really sure how to properly introduce it. If I call it obscure, there'll be plenty of people telling me how much they've always loved it. If I act like everyone knows about it, plenty of people have no idea what I'm talking about. The best I can do is assume that those who are familiar with the series are mainly familiar with 2, partially because 2 is multiplayer focused, and Lost Planet heads like me probably introduced them to the game via its co-op campaign. But I'm prepared for that assumption to get steamrolled by a blizzard of, actually, everyone and their dog has played Lost Planet 1, so please just bear with me on this. For those that know nothing about the series, I'm going to be really upfront and tell you that Lost Planet 1 is a really stupid game.
I'm still here! Yeah. Oh, I got you.
A really stupid game that I absolutely adore. I would describe the plot as being very anime, but there's a lot of anime with hugely better writing than this. I think, more accurately, it's like those games whose narrative feels like a Saturday morning cartoon, but Japanese. And if you're not really into Japanese media, this might be a problem for you. But if you even have a passing familiarity with weeb stuff, you'll be fine. And honestly, that's because Lost Planet manages to, at the very least, have a competent script, even if the story beats feel like they were randomly generated by some AI algorithm. What I mean by this is that, a lot of times with bad writing, you're missing major elements that keep you at least somewhat engaged. With Lost Planet, you know what you're supposed to be doing, why you're supposed to be doing it, and the picture of where you are is fleshed out more than it has any right to be. Plenty of bad fiction just assumes pop cultural consciousness will allow your brain to fill in all the blanks in the setting. And while Lost Planet is incredibly tropey, there's so much love put into this world that you can't help but love it too. For those who aren't familiar, the basic gist is this. Pollution has ruined the Earth, surprise surprise, and the megacorp Nevik has been attempting to colonize a multitude of planets in order to move the human population off Earth. EDN3 was one such colonization effort that was pretty successful judging by all the ruins you see spread around. But turns out that all the awfulness in the planet has just been in a seasonal hibernation period. It's not super clear if the nightmare blizzard across the surface was around during initial settlement, or if it just showed up when all the aliens started burrowing their way back up to the surface. But either way, the titular Lost Planet became near uninhabitable because of extreme temperatures and violent aliens known collectively as Acrid. Of course, the 1% and Nevik immediately pulled out to focus on other colonies, leaving the poor stranded on the planet to become snow pirates, learning to survive by harvesting the newly discovered fuel source known as thermal energy produced inside of Acrid bodies. Of course, like any good corp, the second Nevik figured out there was something that could benefit them on the planet, they showed back up all like, "Oh, hey guys, long time no see. Notice you got some cool glowy tang over there. Mind if we just, grab that from ya?" Basically, think Pandora from Borderlands, but snow instead of desert, and alien juice instead of alien artifacts. And for anyone curious, this came out 3 years before Borderlands, though I kinda suspect any similarities are coincidence. Though maybe not, I'd love to know if anyone has more info on that. Either way, that's honestly all you really need to know. Like I said before, the plot is pretty tropey, and even the devs realized this, cause in 2 they cut off all the fluff and just had the plot be about people doing over-the-top anime stuff while fighting the powers that be, instead of all the intrigue 1 tries to pull off. But if you're playing Lost Planet, it's probably not for the plot. It's for the stellar gameplay and creative aesthetics. After having put so many hours in 2, and 1 just being pretty old, it's from 2006, I was honestly worried checking back in on it that my fondness was mostly nostalgia. But no. Even though the gameplay is a straight downgrade from 2, it's still really fun to play. Even the most boring parts where you're just wandering around snowdrifts scrounging for mech bits are so atmospheric and engrossing. Yeah, did I mention this game has mechs? It has a lot of mechs. Maybe, honestly, some of my favorite mech designs of all time. But here's what I love about it too. This doesn't have to be a mech game if you don't want it to be. I almost get this slight Deus Ex vibe, where there are so many different playstyles to choose from. No, Deus Ex isn't quite right. I think maybe the more accurate analogy is it's that sort of feel that Halo goes for. You're given all these tools that have intended uses, but tons of leeway if the player wants to get more creative. And the maps are all these sort of long sandboxes scattered with goodies. It's all customizable on the fly, with just enough fuss to make reformulating your strategy mid-fight doable, but also punishable by enemies. You like the weapon you were using on your current mech, but just found a mech you like better, but has trash weapons? Just pull them off and slot them onto the new mech. Found a mech that has weapons you can't pull off? It probably has some cool features to it to make up for it, like being able to transform into a second mode with different attacks. Maybe you don't want to use the mechs at all. Well, there's plenty of gear for you to use on foot. And they give you a grappling hook so you can actually traverse all these environments designed for huge vehicles and aliens to stomp around in. Like a mech weapon, but have no mech? Just pick it up. It slows you down and the reload times are abysmal, but now you've got the firepower of a tank in your hands. As far as I'm concerned, this is exactly what a great action game should strive for. Every element of the game is tuned for fun, while still feeling like you have to earn it. You're always going to be outnumbered, and they have access to the same gear you do. The AI is a bit brain dead, but underestimate them and they will ruin your day. And in keeping with the setting, it's not just pure action. There are survival elements too. And before anyone groans, yeah, I hate survival mechanics a lot too, but at no point does this get in your way. Ammo is plentiful. While you might not always have the weapon you want, you'll always find something scattered around and pretty much everything is viable. If all you have is the starting assault rifle and you're facing mechs or giant acrid, it's going to be a lot tougher than if you're geared up with anti-armor weapons. But if you're smart about it, you can still absolutely take on any enemy in the game. Instead, the survival aspect comes from how much thermal energy you've got. It's constantly going down in order to combat the temperature and any damage you take. And if you're in a mech or using mech abilities like hovering, it'll drain even faster. But this orange slurry drops from basically everything. Enemies, objects, you even get a bunch by activating these sort of checkpoint things. You'll notice me not even bothering to pick up the little puddles, because you really don't need to. The only time I've ever had to worry about it is when I played poorly and wasted all my resources. It actually solves a huge problem games with big open maps like this usually have, which is that you can just run past most enemies. But you're encouraged not to, because you know they're full of that delicious heat goo, just waiting for you to slurp up. And because of this, it's fairly easy to max out your thermal energy reserves, but they even thought of that. There's a decent handful of energy weapons in the game that instead of using standard munitions, use your thermal energy to fire. Which seems like a waste when you're starting out a level and your thermal energy reserves are low, but once you're maxed out, there is no reason not to go ham with whatever you want. It makes every level feel like a power arc, where you start out carefully allocating your thermal energy. Maybe you haven't found a rocket launcher, so you're going to use one of the powerful energy weapons to take out a mech faster. But now you have to be more careful with how much you fly around. But by the middle of the level, you've got enough to moderately spend your resources. And by the end, you're just busting out every move you've got on the boss because you've been building up your resource reserves the whole rest of the area. It lets them ramp up every level in a way that feels natural and earned. And if they decide to start a level already escalated, it just forces you to get creative. Because you're basically a snowball rolling down a hill. Every bite you take out of the superior opposition, the stronger you get yourself. It gives you this feeling that even if a section is unfair, you have the tools to even the odds. And I've never quite gotten that feeling out of any other series that I can think of. And speaking of originality, I want to get into the aesthetics because I love the art direction of Lost Planet. The way I see it, anything that's cool has to be, to some extent, cringy in order to be cool. It shouldn't work. A lot of the environments are just shades of white, gray, and brown. Everything's got those generic glowy sci-fi bits on them, and none of the mechs are anything you haven't seen before. but I think this is an example of something being more than just the sum of its parts. Yeah, the environments are all really flat in saturation, but this just makes all the fantastically vibrant particle effects pop just that much more. Every rocket explosion feels like an event. The contrast draws your eyes to all the gameplay elements your eyes should be drawn to. This makes all the glowy bits stand out too, and not only do they stand out, but they feel justified in being there for once. The acrid all have glowy weak points because thermal energy glows, so it's basically like seeing your veins through your skin. And all the human gear has glowy bits too because they're using the thermal energy and thus copying the biodesign of the aliens. It gives you this connection to the acrid that a lot of games just don't with their aliens. It gives you this sense that humans have been here for so long that we've truly integrated and adapted to the life cycle of this world in a way that having just generic military gear wouldn't convey. I said before that these mechs, called vital suits or VSs in universe, are some of my favorite. And honestly, if I had to place a bet on what real far future mechs might resemble, this would be a contender. I mean that seriously. There's something so perfect about the mix of anthropomorphic elements and the industrial construction that gives them a certain amount of personality I just don't see in many other mech designs. They're also grimy and mechanical with pneumatics and cables, while at the same time feeling really biologically inspired. There's something so organic about their animations that mixes perfectly with their rugged and sometimes shoddy construction that helps me really identify with each individual design in a different way. And the sound design just knocks it out of the park. It's that right amount of constant clunk without ever getting annoying. In fact, if you're a good listener, you can identify what might be up ahead just by being aware of their distinct sound cues. Honestly, I thought I'd have more to say in terms of trashing the game. But the obvious thought and passion that is in Lost Planet makes it really hard to pay attention to its flaws while you're playing. Something that so few games actually manage to pull off, to the point where it kind of felt like a breath of fresh air. And for sure, this is a very flawed game. All the improvements in the sequel make it clear that the devs knew that, and as much as I adore 2 as well, that game is also pretty flawed. But I think what a lot of studios and publishers don't realize, and maybe even quite a few gamers disagree with nowadays, is that being flawed is not what makes a game bad. You can have the most perfect, clean, well-assembled game possible, and it still just might be a really awful experience to play. In fact, I'd go so far as to argue that the most well-put-together games tend to be far less interesting, creative, and entertaining than a lot of the severely flawed but imaginative games. In Lost Planet, you go from sections that feel right out of the Aliens movie, fending off swarms of acrid, to sections climbing mountain ruins and surviving frigid wastes. To sections having anime battles with corporate bootlickers and giant monsters. None of it feels out of place. All of it thematically, visually, and gameplay-wise is super coherent. And it helps give the setting so much life and depth, even though there's barely any lore they actually discuss. I feel more familiar and more a part of Lost Planet's setting while playing than I do with a lot of games with pages and pages of lore written out. And trust me, I am that kind of guy that obsessively scours the wiki of every game I play for any extra lore trivia. You know the type. That one friend who will ramble about Metal Gear plot or Kingdom Hearts lore or something else for 4+ hours straight if you let me. But Lost Planet proves you only need that stuff for crazy people like me. It proves that when done right, show don't tell is one of the most powerful tools in a developer's arsenal. If any of this stuff looks at all intriguing to you, and you've never checked out the series, I absolutely highly recommend it. And if you're one of those people with friends, I even more highly recommend checking out the sequel, which is just this but mostly better and with some of the best co-op mechanics I've ever gotten my hands on. In fact, I would really like to do a video on 2 at some point in the future, whenever I get around to it. I guess with nothing really more to say, I've kind of reached the elephant in the room, which is Lost Planet 3. To be honest, I quit 5 minutes in because I noticed the tang doesn't loop together anymore. That's my whole take on 3.